G'day and welcome to the Rock Essentials. First of all, thank you for purchasing. This video is going to give you a complete introduction to the product that you just purchased. So there's a bunch of stuff in it, as you know. There's rocks, there's cliffs, there's ground materials, there's brushes, all sorts of stuff. And I'm sure it would be a pain trying to figure out how to use it yourself. So that's what this video is. It's going to give you a complete overview of how to do everything with it. So you should only need to watch it once and then you should fully understand the product. So we'll try to do it as quickly as possible. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, this will cover both the Ultimate Pack as well as the Light Pack. So if you've purchased the Light Pack, there'll be some stuff in here, you know, brushes and things like that that you don't have. But other than that, it's, yeah, you should be able to follow along. Okay, so first things first, let's start with the zip files. So you have downloaded all these zip files from Blender Guru. So now that you've downloaded them, what you want to do is unzip them into one folder. So I like to use 7-zip. It's just a fast open source, I think, zip thing. And then I just choose one folder and then I unzip it. And then once you do that, they will all be in one folder, like I just mentioned, and they're all split up into their own subfolders as well. So if you do it all at once, then it will all be together and already organized and ready to go. So now that we've done that, let's go and have a new scene open up here, and we're going to start doing some stuff. So first of all, the bread and bones of the bread and butter of the product, which is the rocks. So to append anything, or import, I should say, anything, any model, you do that in Blender by going to File, Append. So let's go to that folder right now. So that's this one. Yeah, this aren't the folders that you've got, but anyways, it's the exact same thing. So inside the rocks folder, you'll see all of the rocks split up into their own categories according to what types there are. Now inside some of them, you'll see more than one size, which, yeah, pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to go with this desert one here, and I'm going to use the large rocks, and I'm just going to select large there. So then inside the dot blend, you want to go to group, and then just select append for that group. And that's it. So you've now appended them in. Hooray. Now, they look very low poly right now, so don't be turned off like, oh, these aren't detailed at all. It's because they've been retopologized, so you can see that the meshes are all clean. That was the hardest part about doing this entire product, was that each one was retopologized. And so what that means is that the detail can be turned up or down with the subsurf right there. And then underneath that subsurf, you've got this displacement modifier, which adds this extra level of detail to the geometry there. But underneath that, you can see that it's repeated. So you've got one subsurf and one displacement. And then underneath that, you've got another subsurf and another displacement. And they've got these purple icons on it. So you might be wondering, what on earth is going there and why can't I click any of this stuff? Well, if you push the N key, you might remember this from the sales video, but we have properties for each rock. So down here, you have properties right there. And you can see there's a bunch of different stuff here. There's saturation, hue, all that kind of stuff. But there's one at the top there called high detail mode. And that is what's controlling these little purple things here. So there's only two values, 0, which is off, and then 1, which is on. So once you set that to 1, it makes both of these all turned on, essentially. So yeah, the point of having high detail mode is that we want it so that you can import in bunch of rocks into your scene. You can throw them about, use them everywhere, and it will be fairly low poly because it will only by default use just this first amount of subsurf, like 3 levels of it. But then if you want to have a really detailed rock, like one that's like really close to the camera, like say you've got the camera like here. Okay, that would be really close. But like, yeah, let's say, yeah, like say this was your scene, you had all those rocks in the background there. Well, this rock that's in the foreground, you need an extra level of detail for it. So you would turn high detail mode on for that one rock there. This will drastically increase your memory, which is why you don't want to do it for all the rocks at once, because your computer will crash most likely. So I just use it for the ones that are near the camera. Other than that, everything else in the background should look fine. Other than that as well, you can also change the amount of subsurf. So you can see that the view amount is set to 0, but it will render with 3. So if you've got a rock that's like way in the background, well, you don't need 3 levels because that's unnecessary detail. So I would then just maybe turn that one down to render 1, perhaps, or even 0 if it was far enough away. So you can control the amount of detail, because remembering that rocks in nature, they're everywhere. They're just like, there's so many you can't count them in a standard scene. They're just everywhere. And if you try to have that in Blender with just everything turned up to the max, you'll give up because it won't render and it'll be frustrating to use. So that's what this is all about. It's about optimizing your scene. Optimizing, I think when I was a beginner, I hated the word optimize because I'm like, no, everything should be high detail. But if you do that, things just don't work. So you want to use these, yeah. So I might maybe make that one too, or anyway, you get the point. So the other thing to note before we move on is that you've got these settings here, like you got saturation, you got hue, value, stuff like that. I'm just going to go into rendered view mode there, which was Shift Z to do that. I'm going to turn on Pro Lighting Skies, which is a completely separate product, but some of you might have it. It's just HDRs basically. So with this rock here selected, you can change any of these values here. So one that I like to do is to turn, I like to change the saturation and then the value. And you can make it look like a completely different rock. Like you can see this no longer looks like a desert rock. This looks like a mountain rock, which is why it's why it's so powerful. Like there's 267 rocks and we tried to include like every category, but then for each rock, you can also customize it to make it look like an entirely different rock just by changing these values here. You could also make it look like it's just rained. Like you could turn the roughness amount down, make it look like it's a wet rock like that. The other ones, there's image bump and then there's procedural bump. So the image bump is the normal map, which is, for those not familiar with that, it's like the original texture file, then we calculated the bumps off it. So like little cracks here would actually make, little bumps on it. And then the procedural ones is like a cloud texture, which is over the top of it, so that when you get in really close, you can still see some fine detail there. So you can control both of those. You could turn down that one or turn off procedural altogether. Yeah, it's really up to you. Anyways, so that's pretty much it. And if you were curious as well, by the way, where those settings are actually changed in Blender, it's just changing it in the nodes here. So if you go to the material settings and you see a bunch of like purple things, it's just because it's being controlled here. But if you did ever, by the way, want to control it not by this, then you could just select that and select delete driver. And then you've got full control over it without it being connected. But there you go. Okay. So those are the rocks, pretty self-explanatory for the most part. Now let's go ahead and jump into the cliffs. So exact same thing as the rocks. I'll go to a separate layer here and I will go to File, Append, and I will select a cliff. What cliff do I want? Desert? Let's try desert. Group, cliffs. Okay, so exactly like the rocks. Whoops. For each of these, you have some settings here that you can control. And what I like to do, by the way, if you've got like a bunch of rocks and you're not sure which ones you actually want, I like to select the ones, like this that I actually like. Like I might select these, right? And then I'll hit Control I, maybe deselect the camera, and then I just move everything else to a separate like trash layer down there. This is, unrelated to it. I'm just sort of showing you how I work with all these different rocks. So I'll do the same thing for this. I'll just move those to its own little trash layer down there. And let's just focus on this guy. So exact same thing. You got high detail mode, which I might turn on. And you can change the amount of detail you want in the background. Yeah, anyway, I might leave that off. And let's throw him in the background. Okay, so that is it for people that have got the Rock Essentials Lite. Now I'll be talking about some extra stuff like the brushes and the ground materials and the rock materials. So let's start with the ground. Let's try and build a little scene here. It might look like trash by the end of it, but we'll try. This is just a how-to tutorial. So for the ground materials, so these are photo scanned grounds, and they are basically just image files. So the way you use it is you first add a plane and scale it up to however big you want, right? Like that. And then you want to You want to give it a material. I'm just trying to think in logical order what we do. Give it a material. Go to the node editor over here. And what I recommend doing is actually getting the PBR, this one, PBR dielectric shader, this guy. So this is one, if you're familiar with the tutorials on Blender Guru, you're probably familiar with this already, but there's a PBR shader which I provided on Blender Guru completely for free, and it's just a bunch of stuff to make a physically accurate material. The benefit being that these 4 values here are exposed, and it's very easy to connect with something like these photo scan ground materials. So if you want really nice looking materials, I recommend downloading this from Blender Guru. I'll put a link here so you can actually go to it and download it yourself. But anyways, so for the ground material, the way we go and we add the ground material into Blender is we just add an image texture. So I'll go image texture and select open. So these are the ground textures right here. So you can see we've got a bunch of different ones. We've got forest, pebbles, sand, stone, world machine. That should not be, I don't think that's in the final one. That's just mountain stuff. Anyway, so let's say, let's have a look at the sand. Now you can see that you've got something that says RDT. Now these are the ones that are photo scanned. We've got some extra ones in here. We've got sand, beach, clean. We've got some clay ones here. If it doesn't say RDT, what it just means is that it's not photo scanned. So those weren't mentioned in the sales video at all, like these separate ones here. But these RDT ones are. These are the photo scan ones, which means that the height information is proper. So that's the one we're going to use for this demonstration. So I'm going to click it, and let's have a look at them. So you can see that the color, this is sort of getting a little bit deep into like how sort of textures work, but I'll just sort of walk through, what it is. So color is the color information for the material. So that's the main one that I want. And you could see, by the way, for that, there was another one next to it called Variation 2. That's an albedo map, which just means we try to remove the shadows as best we could. Variation, yeah. So I might just use that. Let's load that one in, and we connect that to the dielectric material, the main one right there. Now, if you were to render this right now, you likely would not see anything, and that's because we haven't UV unwrapped the plane yet. So I'll just go here, unwrap, and there we go. So now it's unwrapped, and we've now got the sand applied to it. Looks awful at the moment because there's nothing really going on. So let's add in the other stuff. So we've got roughness, reflection, and normal maps. So let's start by duplicating that. And let's go... Okay, glossy. So glossy is another word for roughness. So you want to set that to non-color data, which is very important so that Blender knows how to use it properly, and connect that to the roughness input of this dielectric shader. Then we're going to duplicate that again, and this one we're going to connect to the reflection shader. Reflection map, I should say. Again, making sure, I mean, if you duplicated it would be anyway, but make sure non-color data is used for that. And then finally, the last one, which will make all the difference, we're going to be using the normal map, which is this purple one down there. So if you're familiar with normal maps, you know that it has to go through a normal map node first. So connect that in, and there we go. Haha, awesome. Now, if you get in really close to it, you'll see that it's still a flat image. And you're probably wondering, like, how is this any different to other textures, Andrew? Like, it's, it's just a standard thing. Well, we've got something that we haven't added yet, which is a displacement map, which is physically accurate, like I said in the video, to a real ground plane, because it is, photo scanned. So the way we're going to add it is go to the modifier stacker here. And first of all, because it uses real geometry, let me get a drink here first. Because it uses real geometry, we have to subdivide the plane. So I'm going to subdivide this 50 times, and then I'm going to add another subsurf on top of it, and then a displacement underneath it. So this displacement, this is the one where we're going to be adding in the texture. So I'm going to hit New Texture, then go Texture, Displace Texture, and then select Open. And then here, you can see we've got two displacement files. One of them, actually you might not have two possibly, but you'll have one which is a TIFF file. that says displace 16 and then one which is a JPEG which just says displace. So displacement 16 means that it's a 16-bit color file. So there's a little bit extra color information in it, so it will remove any stepping issues. So I personally just like to use the best available. So I just stick to this one. It will use slightly more memory, but I think it's worth it. So we'll go ahead and add that in. Now, here's something interesting that I only just learned, I think literally like a week ago. And that's that for displacement image textures, you should be changing the color space to non-color. I had no idea that that was important, but it is. So do that. And then down here for the displacement as well, you want to make sure that you are using UV. If you don't have that, then the color map as well as the displacement, they won't match. Now, if you get this result here, that's because you haven't applied the scale of your plane yet. So hit Control A and then select scale. And there we go. Now, the other thing is that for this scene, like this wavy pattern here is way too big. So we want to turn the scale of that sand down or up, I guess. So I'm going to scale this up by 3. Yeah, so I just hit S and then typed in the number 3. And now you can see that it's working well. This is really the only time that I wouldn't just use a, mapping node, which is what I normally do for tutorials. Because you want it to also affect this displacement here, you have to actually change that UV map there as well. Anyway, so now that I've done this, it's like I need a lot more geometry. So I'm going to turn up my subsurf right there. And also when you do this, you'll notice that it looks too intense, the height of the displacement. So I then turn that down to about 0.1. And there we go. So now if we have a look at this, we should have realistic detail across the physical geometry of our sand there. And as well as that, we should have the normal map, the roughness map, the reflection map, a bunch of stuff going on. Let's just have a look at it. If my computer can catch up and actually do the rendering. It is slow. Let's see, will it crash? No, it doesn't. Hey. Okay. So that means it's working. Okay, I'd increase the scaling even more because you can see in relation to these rocks, it still looks too big, but you get the basic understanding of it. One thing I like to do, this is just an extra little tip here, is I like to add, let's just turn this down a little bit. I like to add another displacement modifier, place it on top of this one, select new, and then I'll call this one clouds and make it a cloud texture. And what this is going to do is it's just going to give some size variation to the sand so that it's not just one completely flat plane with just little bumps across it, but it's actually got some divots and things like that. So I might, make it a little bit bigger or smaller or whatever. Something like that. And then I'll turn, I'll make sure that this is set to Z only. So we're only controlling the up and down thing. Otherwise the displacement map can kind of get a little weird. And then I'll set this to about a 0.2 like so. So very, subtle changes, but it should add up overall to make something nice. Yay. Okay. So what is next? So next, let's talk about the rock brushes. Okay, so the rock brush. This part is really cool. I like this stuff. So if you go and hit append, and then go to your brushes folder, wherever that is. I think it's, where did I put them? Brushes. Blender. Select the file that says Rock Essentials brushes, and then up the top here you've got one that says brush. Now if you open that, it might take a little while to load. Then you should see 33 rock brushes here. I think there might be 2 extra ones added in there, so just remove those. But you just want to just select these cliff ones and then hit append. Now when you do that, you won't see anything change here. But if you go into, actually first of all you have to have an object, so let's add in a plane. If you go into sculpt mode, over here, you should see all these brushes being loaded in. And that's what we want. So to begin sculpting, first of all, let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's bring in everything just so we can see it. And I'm just going to make some rocks. Yeah, I'll just make them just slightly underneath the sand here. This is a little trick I like to do. It's pretty fun, actually. Just position it just underneath the ground plane. And then I subdivide it about 50 times. No reason for that number being used repeatedly. It's just something I do. And we're going to go and use the multi-resolution modifier, which if you're not familiar with that, that's used primarily just for sculpting so that you can subdivide like this, and then you can change the levels and like delete the higher levels or whatever. Anyway, it's basically a subsurf modifier, but it only reflects the sculpting stuff essentially. Anyways, okay, so yeah, first thing you want to do is you want to get in some detail there. So I'm going to subdivide it 3 times, and then let's just select any of these brushes here. This one will do, and drag it out. Now you'll see it appear twice if you've got the default settings turned on. So make sure that you turn it off by going underneath Symmetry Lock and turning Mirror off. I don't know why that's on in Blender by default anyway. It just feels odd. It seems like something only character modelers would use. But anyway, so now that we've done that, we can see that we can now sculpt just by, without applying twice. Now, one thing you'll note is that this behaves differently to a normal brush. Normally, a brush is you select the thing and then you just draw with it, you just draw like this. But these are different. So these are what are called anchored brushes. So you click once where you want it to start, and then you just drag out, and then you rotate to create the size of it. Very easy, and you'll get the hang of it very quickly. So that's it. Now, one thing to note, if you look at this, you can see that like from over here, it looks like it's very detailed. But if you get in close, you can see a bunch of annoying faces there. So you generally want to turn up the subsurface to a point that your computer is struggling. And then once you've done that, then you'll be able to see the full detail actually come through in the brushes. So let's try another brush here. When you first click it, by the way, Blender might be a little slow to first of all just load in the image the first time you draw it. But it should be fine when you draw it again. Now, another thing is that you can actually change the whole look of the brush almost just by the amount of the strength of the brush. So you can see I turned it down just a little bit for this one, and you can see it's gone from looking like a prominent rock that's sort of sticking out of the surface to something that's just like a flat squashed rock that you might see on like a beach or something like that. Okay, now there is one other thing to mention, and that is that if you draw at an angle like this, the resulting rock will look very different than if you drew it from the top like this. Now you might not be able to see much there. And by the way, well, not really a trick, most people know this, but there's matte cap shading. If you turn this on, it's a lot easier to see what you've drawn. Now you can't really see much. Perhaps that wasn't the best example of a texture to show. Let's try a different one, something a little bit more detailed. Okay, so if I draw that out. So essentially, I mean, I'm not actually seeing that much of a difference here. You usually see it a lot if you're drawing on like a cube, like with edges. If you draw at an angle, you'll sometimes notice that the detail looks like it's sort of like on a slant. So in which case, if you are drawing with a cube, that's the only time, oops, I accidentally hit Shift Z. That's the only time when you would want to use view plane instead of area plane. So when you set it to view plane, it bases it off of whatever view that you're currently at. So if I used it from this plane, you can see that looks stretched and awful. But if it was from the top, then it looks perfectly fine. So it's just one of those things. So stick to area plane for most of the time, but if it looks odd for whatever reason, you can switch to view plane. But anyways, so let's just do, let's see. Let's do a little tiny bit of sculpting. I might bring back my main surface here just so I can see it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make some rock that's sort of peeking through the surface a few times. So it's a cool little way to just add some visual interest to the scene. At least the way I like to do it anyway. So just a few times like this. Maybe one more over here. Can't even see that one. Let's do it again. One in the back there. Couldn't see that one either. Let's try that. Okay. All right. So now that we've done that, let's turn off matte cap mode and let's just take a look at this guy. So yeah, you won't see any detail if you've got your preview set to 0. You want to have it set to the sculpt. Anyway, so that's good. Now, we're going to jump now to the next bonus, which is used in partnership with the sculpting brushes, but that is the rock materials. So go ahead and hit append or shift F1 for the little shortcut. And we're going to go and load in the, where is it? Materials. Here they are, the Rock Essentials materials. So once you're inside the materials file, hit material, and then you should see all of these. So I just hit A. Sorry for that annoying little thing. So I just hit A to select everything and then hit append. Now again, you won't see anything change immediately in Blender, but if you go to the material panel over here, then you will see a bunch of rocks down here with zeros next to them, meaning that they're not applied to any material, any object yet. So by the way, if you were to save Blender, close it and reopen it, all these materials would vanish, as you probably know, because there's no user for them. So Blender removes them to save space, I guess. Anyway, so they're all here. So this is a great way to just cycle through and see what materials look good for you to sculpt. So before you can, actually, let's just show you. I'll just click one. If you were to look at this right now, which you will in a second, you will see that my computer is slow. No, you will see that it won't actually load properly. Oh my goodness, it's slow. I guess this sculpt is pretty detailed. Maybe I should have demoed it on a smaller sculpt. If this takes much longer... No, it's not going to crash. I just have to wait. Wait for the program to respond. All right, I'll pause it whilst this is going. And it recovered. Okay, so you can see that the material, like you look at this and it looks terrible. You're thinking, gee, that's an awful material that was included with the Rock Essentials. Well, actually, it just hasn't been UV unwrapped yet. So all of these materials that are included, it relies on UV unwrapping. So let's exit rendered mode and make sure that I don't do that again. Turn down the preview to at least level 3. And then I will go to UV image editor and unwrap it. If that happens, I'll just select project from view bounds. There we go. Okay. UVs are fun, aren't they? Okay, so let's have a look at that now. It should take a lot less time to, yep, there we go. And hooray, the material is loaded. Now, the image files themselves are quite sort of zoomed in on specific rock types. So, however, they are seamless. So what that means is you should make sure that your UV unwrap, your UV scale, whatever, is at a considerably bigger size than this. So I'm just going to hit S and then select 3 and then press enter. And if you do it with the rendered view mode on at the same time, it takes a while. But anyways, okay, so now that I've done that, I mean, it should be more like 5 or something like that, but yeah, let's just go with 3. And then let's go to the materials and let's just cycle through these. Oh boy, come on now. Okay, but that's basically it. So that is how you use, the materials. So it's a cool way of, after you finish sculpting something, to have a look at it with some actual rock materials applied to it. So they are all seamless and they are all based off real rocks from the real world. Some of them look nicer than others depending on what sort of sculpt you're doing. But yeah, it's just a matter of experimenting and just sort of scrolling through them and finding something that actually looks good. So let's say I like this one here. Let's just bring in everything, all my rocks, my sand, my everything. And there you go. So you can see this scene looks horrendous. But again, it is just a how-to tutorial. So that should hopefully give you a head start on how to use the Rock Essentials to start making some interesting scenes. As always, we are interested in seeing your renders. So if you make something cool, you can send it to me on Twitter at Andrew P. Price, or you can send it to us via email, support@blenderguru.com. And we are hoping to update the Rock Essentials at some point in the future, probably with bug fixes and other things like that, so you can check back on Blender Guru for updates. Other than that, thank you for purchasing. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the Rock Essentials. Thank you for watching.